Gotta hurry up and get this Jeep thing hidden in the garage before somebody sees it.
Searching for greatness in a sea of the dying and shameless, a sea of the aimless. I don't wanna be one of the nameless. I'ma wake up with the mindset that one day I'm gonna make it, and I don't think I'll be fine if I don't break my limitations. Don't try to stop me, I exist to write my own story.
So what we have here is a 2022 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. It's the V6 automatic, standard Rubicon, but it looks like the gentleman wants it to be about 3 inches taller, I think is what he said he ordered. So he bought a Rock Krawler Suspensions lift kit for it, and he's got some meatier tires and wheels coming for it, and I'm gonna get the suspension portion taken care of for him. So it's a new rig, so hopefully it should go fairly well, we hope. At least we won't be fighting any rust issues, so that's always good. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so we got it safely supported on some jack stands, got the front wheels off, and I got a suspension setup that looks all too familiar because it looks a lot like what I just put on Spike. Let's get to tearing. All right, so the kit that we got has new front and rear coil springs. We've got new lower control arms. We have a new front track bar, rear and front bump stops, new coil spring isolators, front and rear, rear track bar relocation bracket, and front and rear sway bar links, along with that box of brand new shocks. So lots of goodies here. Let's get started. So we're getting started with a 18 millimeter socket on an impact gun and wrench. The bottom is a nut and bolt combo. So 18 millimeter nut on the back, 18 millimeter headed bolt on the front. The top is just a bolt, and the nut is part of the mount bracket on the back side, so you don't have to hold anything there. We are setting all the stock hardware aside. It does get reused for the reinstallation. Up next, we need to remove the brackets for the front brake hoses, and we'll get those out of the way. Also, at some point here with the lift, we are going to have to add slack, so we'll remove some of this stuff from these brackets. We need to get a little more slack in the line for the front axle actuator. But yeah, we got to get the sway bar links off, and in order to drop the axle far enough, I think we got to knock the drag link out for the side to side in order to get the axle to drop far enough to get the spring out. So we'll keep plugging away here. Okay, so just unbolting some things. The sway bar was also 18 millimeter. The track bar is 21 millimeter. The lower control arm bolts are a 21 millimeter headed bolt with a 24 millimeter headed nut on the backside. The brake line was 15 millimeter. And again, we're blessed with being able to work on something new. Everything's coming apart nice and easy so far. But yeah, I am just going to go ahead and get the new lower control arm into place kind of ahead of time while everything is loose and free, and then once that stuff is in place, then we'll lower it down enough to get the coil springs swapped out. But yeah, so I will have to say I've got the lower control arm into that frame bracket there, but look at how much play that bolt. If you can see that or not. Look at how much play that bolt had. The nut is on the back side, and it's not tight, mind you. But you think their tolerance for that bolt hole would be a lot tighter than that. That just blows me away. So just looking at the other end, the bolt, the Jeep bolt, does fit very tight in the lower link arm. Like, it doesn't have a bunch of slop. However, the axle hole is square. And there's no provisions for doing something different with that. That just seems like, I don't know, seems weird to me. I'm not a fan, I'm not gonna lie. Obviously we're gonna torque everything to, you know, Rock Krawler specifications, but just an observation as I'm putting things together that kind of shocked me. So as you start to lower the axle down, pay very close attention to your brake cables, your anti-lock brake wires, and the wiring for the front axle disconnect in the front locker, and the diff vent, all that stuff. There's slack available if you pop it out of some of the extra clips that they have, and that gave me adequate slack and everything, that nothing's pulled tight at full droop. So just make sure you do that. And now that I got it there, we're gonna get these springs swapped out. Okay, and at that height, the coil spring simply lifts off of here and just slides down. There's, you know, plenty of room up here. It was already hanging. So I've removed the factory lower spring isolator and installed the Rock Krawler one. And now the kit that we got has the bump stop extensions. So it says for the 3-inch lift, which we have, it recommends 3 of the bump stops. You could go with 2, but then you run risk of rubbing your tire on your fender depending on tire size. So we're gonna go with the 3. We do have to drill the center hole there in the lower spring perch up to the 1/2-inch diameter to fit this bolt. So we're gonna go ahead and get that done, drill both of these, get these bump stop extensions in place, and then we will try to get the new springs in here. All right, so I got my holes drilled, and the easiest way to get to the nut on the bottom side is to remove this bracket which holds your brake line ABS line. So I've removed the 10mm bolt that was in that hole right there, and then the bracket rocks back and then pulls out. And you just push it up out of your way, but that gives you tons of clearance underneath. Get your hand in there, get that nut started, and then put a wrench on it to hold it for your 19mm or 3/4 inch nut and bolt. Okay, so with the drag link removed to try and get maximum droop, and the brake line removed, still, I held my bump stop up inside the coil as I guided the coil onto the mount. Now I'll put the nut in on the underside. I'm gonna try and get a ratchet with a socket on it through the coil spring, and we'll tighten that bump stop spacer to its mount there, and then we'll move on to the other side. And on this side, I found that actually, because that coil spring bump stop is actually in multiple pieces, it was easier to get my coil spring into place and then slide each individual puck in on top of the next, and then slide my bolt in and put my spacer, bump stop spacer in after the fact. So got that done. Got the new track bar bolted up at this end. We predetermined the measurement based on Rock Krawler specifications to 34 5/16 from center of eye to center of eye. And so we'll get that thing loosely bolted into place, get the axle back up where it goes, and then get some shocks and some sway bar links on. Loosely installing all of my hardware, drag link reinstalled, and trying to line up the bolt for the track bar. I've taken a ratchet strap, hooked around the backside of the knuckle, being very careful not to touch the ABS wire that's back there. And then going around into this hole on the frame at the other end, and then using the ratchet strap to pull the axle over to line my bolt hole up. And then I've got this large all poker tool punch that I shoved in there to perfectly line up that hole. Now we'll get that hardware slid into place here. Again, just loosely installing everything. I will not final tight any of it until the truck is sitting back on the weight of all of its tires. While I'm here, I'm also have loosened the upper control arm bolts at both ends, because the rubber is vulcanized or glued a part of the axle housing at this end into a bushing, and then into the arm at the other end. You don't want preload tension against those bushings. So you want to loosen everything once it's installed and sitting on its own weight at ride height, then tighten everything. Other words, you're preloading twist against those bushings, and it'll cause premature failure, and it'll cause it to ride a little harsher. So we don't want any of that. And these insanely beefy looking things are not control arms. These are actually sway bar links. So the sway bar links need to be set to a predetermined length based on your amount of lift. For our 3-inch lift, that's 11 inches center eye to center eye. We're going to get that adjusted and get the jam nuts all tightened up, and then utilize the provided hardware to bolt those into place on the front of the truck. Once your sway bar links are loosely installed, next up is your shocks. So the ones that this kit has been spec'd with is the twin tube shock. The bushings are not installed, but it's super easy. Literally just spit on the bushing and squeeze it with my hand. Was able to push one section in, and then again with the insert. It is important to note the upper shock mount. You have the bushing, the insert, but then you also have 2 of these wider poly spacers to keep the shock aligned in its bracket at the top. So let's make sure you're getting your bushings pushed in at the right end. We're going to do that and get it installed like we just have this one, which is loosely installed. I just need to pull that down and zip tie it. But again, I'll do that as I'm kind of going through and tightening everything. So once I have the vehicle at ride height. Okay, so everything just loosely installed as far as hardware. Nothing's tightened, torqued to spec yet, but there's how the front end sits. I'll throw a tape measure on it and see if I get the full 3 inches or more or less or what. But yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool. So now we'll go through and do the rear. And then at the very end, I'll go through and do my torque on all the fasteners from front to back. So pretty sweet. And moving on. Get the back supported safely on jack stands. Get the back tires off and start tearing. So on the rear, we have shocks, coil springs, sway bar links, and a track bar relocation bracket that we need to install. Let's get to it. Okay, remove the shock, remove the sway bar link, loosen the link arm bolts front and back, and then we removed the metal wire bracket that was here that was supporting the ABS wire. You need to remove that to give a little extra slack to the ABS wire. And then I went ahead and loosened up this track bar bolt. I did not remove it yet, but at some point we'll have to, obviously, because we're going to put that extension bracket piece on there. But yeah. Let's move around to the other side, get it in the same condition. We also need to make sure that as we come down that we are giving adequate slack to the differential breather vent hose and the other wiring going to the axle. So just be real careful as you do that. We'll keep tearing. Again, lowering the axle down very slowly and controlled, just keeping an eye on my slack on my wires and hoses. Was able to get it low enough to get the coil springs out of there. Now we will start the reassembly. So there are some shim pieces that go on the lower spring perch to make sure that the spring sits level as it's on the perch, so you don't get that twist in it. And then we've got the track bar bracket and stuff. So let's grab our parts and see what we can do. Okay, so this is the coil shim for the rear coil. It sits on the axle. You can see there's a F and a R for front and rear. Just make sure you have that orientated in the correct position. Again, that just makes sure that the base of the spring isn't twisted once the axle is pushed down to where it's going to be with the lift spring on there. Now we'll get the new spring in place, making sure to reinstall the isolator on the top of the coil as you put it in. All right, so a bit of a fight. Actually took the brake caliper off, so we didn't stretch the hose. Pulled the ABS wire, again, that bracket, but also up here, pulled everything loose to get as much slack as we could to push the axle down. Still had to have the wife help me on pushing that axle down to get the spring in. What a bear, holy smokes. These rear springs are long, and that was a pain. It is important to note the coil spring isolator for the bottom. The passenger one is thicker than the driver one. Make sure you have those orientated to the correct side. And then just making holes and mounting these bump stop extension pieces on the rear axle. 2 of the holes are already there. And then you gotta measure out and drill your other 2 holes and then bolt these into place with the hardware they give you. So just working on that right now, and then we'll get the other side done and get the track bar relocation bracket installed over there. Bump stop extensions installed, got those all tightened up. They're 9/16 bolt heads and nuts. Now working on the track bar relocation bracket. So there is a spacer bushing that goes in between there. You reuse the stock bolt and nut with like the little tab bolted, welded to it. That goes through your original hole, and then you line it up and drill out holes for the nuts and bolts with washers. 2 here and 2 on the other side, which I'm about to climb under and drill. So we'll get those done, get the bracket tightened, and then we'll get the track bar itself lined up into its hole there, get the bolt through that, and then we can start working on bolting in shocks and sway bar links and getting this thing back on its weight. All right, the shocks went the same as the other side. We got those bushings put in them and got those put into place. And next up is the sway bar links. So on the rear sway bar links, they actually sent me the wrong size grease zert fittings that I'm supposed to thread into there. The threads on the ones they sent me are way too big, so I'm gonna have to go get the right ones and then read up and see what the length is that these need to be pre-adjusted to and get them bolted up. And with the sway bars at 12.5 inches eye to eye as they request for the 3-inch lift, we got her kind of back together here. Do take note, I changed the orientation of the bump stop extension on the rear. It just didn't look like it was going to hit the pad at bump like it should. So I reorientated those forward so as it comes up, it'll hit the center of that pad. Yeah. Now it's time to bolt the back tires back on it, get the whole truck sitting on the ground. We'll bounce the suspension and then go through and torque down and tighten all of the link arm bolts, track bar bolts, and just double check all the other fasteners.